welcome back to my channel. So you guys really seem to like my last how I take notes video. So today I'm giving you an updated version with some more tips on how you can take efficient notes while keeping them neat. So my first tip isn't directly related to writing notes, but it is to keep a separate notebook for all of your subjects, just so it's easier to find what you're looking for. And if you prefer using folders or binders instead, then I would suggest maybe having the notes for 1 or 2 subjects in each binder. Also, just keeping a separate notebook for questions and practice problems makes everything a lot more organized. My next tip is to color code your notes based on chapter or topic, so that when you want to review your notes on a specific chapter, they're easy to find in your notebook. So the way I do it is that I just make a color line around my header, and when I start a new chapter, I just change up the color. Keeping up with the color theme, my next tip is to use a colored pen to write out important terms. It makes the terms easier to find when reading through your notes, and also just the process of actually changing my pen makes me remember the word I write a lot better. You could either write an explanation of the term in the notes, or you could make a list of key terms, which can be very useful to have when reviewing the terms or practicing for a test or an exam. Next are some tips for writing faster notes. I always use abbreviations and symbols to speed up the note-taking process. Also, keep in mind that you're just writing for your own learning, so don't worry about completing sentences or incorrect grammar, or that your handwriting should look as neat as possible. The most important thing is that your notes can be used for your own revision later. And if you use a lot of abbreviations, it may be smart to write them down, because you may not remember all of them when reviewing your notes a while later, so just having a little glossary on a post-it note can be really helpful. The next tip is actually something that my middle school social studies teacher made us do. He called it star sentences, and the process is basically that first you skim through the text that you're taking notes from, and then you read through the paragraphs thoroughly one by one and make a summary sentence from each of the paragraphs. And then you can add extra details as bullet points, but only if you feel like you have to. And I just think that it is such a good technique, especially if you're making summary notes before an exam. Next are some tips for using diagrams in your notes. If I think that it will be beneficial to include a diagram in my notes, then I will always include it, and I always roughly sketch it out so that I know I'll have space for it. I also prefer to draw diagrams before writing anything directly related to the diagram, because if I draw the diagram first, a lot of the time I actually find that I can understand the concept from just looking at the diagram alone, so that I don't have to write down an explanation that basically would be a repetition of what the diagram shows. And just taking some extra time to color and label the diagram makes it so much easier to understand and review. And if there's something about the diagram that you find difficult, or if there's something that the diagram doesn't explicitly show, then you can always write it down next to the diagram. My next tip is something that has helped me a lot, especially in essay-based subjects. And it is to use different colored highlighters to highlight different aspects of your notes. Here I've written some suggestions for things that you can highlight both for humanities and sciences. And also, just the process of reading through your notes and highlighting them is, in my opinion, such a good way to review what you've written. As you may have seen from my previous tips and videos, I use a lot of post-it notes. So my next tip is to use them for anything that you don't want to write down in your notebook. Some things that you can use post-it notes for are writing down questions about topics that you don't fully understand, writing down things that your teacher or professor has emphasized in a lecture, writing down any relevant quotes for what you're studying, or maybe writing down a test date. And if you don't want to worry about having enough space to draw your diagrams, you could always draw them on post-it notes too. I sometimes use post-it notes to make unlabeled diagrams and then write the explanation on the back so that I can use them to test myself. Now we are getting close to the end of our notes, and my next tip is to use the bottom of the page wisely. I like using the last lines of the paper to make a short summary of what I've written, which I think is both a good way to review what you've studied, but it is also a good way to quickly study your notes later. And I also like to make some practice questions from the text and stick them to the bottom of my notes as well. My last tip is to leave some space in the margins for adding details later. If you take notes before a class and then bring them with you, you have space to add extra information during lectures while you still have the basics written down. So that is it for these note-taking tips. I really hope that some of these tips can help you because they've definitely helped me a lot. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week with another video.